In any case, were I to invoke logic, logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
I am a logical man, Doctor.
Well, it'll take more than logic to get us out of this.
Logic is a little tweeting bird chirping in a meadow. Logic is a wreath of pretty flowers which smell bad.
The ears make all of the difference.
I find your arguments strewn with gaping defects in logic.
One does not thank logic, Amanda.
Logic. I'm sick to death of logic.
But it is very logical. There's that magic word again. Does your logic find this fascinating, Mr. Spock?
Our logic is to be illogical. That is our advantage. Mr. Spock, it is time. The explosive.
Very well, Captain.
Logic suggests.
Logic? My God, the man's talking about logic. We're talking about universal Armageddon.
Commence primary ignition.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 4 of the Logic Blaster podcast. So today we're going to be talking about Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Disney Plus series. And for those of you who saw the tail end of my last podcast, I had originally planned to cover 2 other series as well, Andor and Tales of the Jedi, but logistically, trying to cover 3 shows in a single podcast, I decided that was a little too ambitious, so let's just cover Obi-Wan in this podcast, and then we'll save Andor and Tales of the Jedi for a future podcast. I think that makes more sense, and I think we can cover the topic in a much more sensible way. Before we get into it, I want to thank all the people who've subscribed. There's been a lot of activity on my channel in terms of new subscribers, so I'm very excited for that. Thank you for everyone who has signed on, and I hope you're enjoying the content, and I hope you'll stick around. There's a lot of really cool stuff coming up on my channel. I don't want to give away too much in terms of what I'm going to be covering. There'll be a lot more G.I. Joe stuff, certainly a lot more Star Wars content, and I hope you guys are going to enjoy it. So before we get into the topic, I should mention that there's going to be spoilers in this. So if you haven't watched the show, you probably might not want to watch this podcast. If you're planning on watching it, I'm going to be talking about the plot and what happens. So spoiler alert. So I want to talk about some of the good stuff that happens in this show. In terms of performances and so forth. Ewan McGregor is amazing in the show. I think he delivers. He is a movie star, and honestly, his acting is fantastic throughout this entire series. He never misses a beat in terms of delivering on the dramatic moments, and also in terms of action. There's quite a bit of activity for Ewan McGregor in this show in terms of the fighting and everything. So, the choreography and so forth between him and Vader is quite well done. There's also another highlight is the actress who plays young Princess Leia is really fantastic. It has a lot to do with the writing, I'm sure, but for such a young actress to actually deliver on a performance that rings true to the character, I congratulate both her and the writers who wrote that part in such a way that it is consistent with what we know about Princess Leia. She's very snarky, she's very smart, able to handle herself, come up with ideas. So all of that seemed very consistent with the character. So well done on that. And they also showed how powerful Darth Vader is. There's one scene where he actually, he reaches up and he grabs a ship flying away out of the sky and slams it down to the ground and then rips the whole side of the ship off. I was just blown away by that. To me, it looked like something that might have been done in a video game, but not in live action. But just showed how powerful he really is, and I love that. I thought that was definitely one of the highlights of the series. That particular scene just kind of blew my mind. Also, his fight with Reva, clearly showing how it was a mismatch and that she really was no competition for him. He didn't even break out his lightsaber. He basically fought her and took away her weapon, and he really had no worries at all about being able to fight her. So that was really well done. I was pretty happy with that. Also, there's a flashback sequence where you see a scene from the time period of episode 2. There's a lightsaber training scene between Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen. So that scene is interesting because it required a little bit of de-aging, probably not enough. They still look a little too old in that scene, but I still loved it. I can look past that aspect of it and just appreciate what it is, where it's like a master and a student trying to, teach an important lesson. And clearly, Anakin Skywalker did not really get that lesson completely. So pretty interesting. And I would have loved to see more of that. I would love a whole show about that, actually, if they did a whole Obi-Wan and Anakin series in live action with the two actors. I think they'd have to improve the de-aging kind of technology to really make it work, but that scene in particular was quite interesting. So I want to talk about the Inquisitors a little bit. I know initially I've seen interviews with the writer, or read interviews with the writer, who originally conceived of this as a feature film. And I know all of the Inquisitors were not initially supposed to be in there. It was really just going to be Reva. And I think it might have been Dave Filoni's suggestion to put the other Inquisitors in there. I think it's a little clunky, the way it's handled. I like seeing them in there, but at the same time, it might have been simpler just to have Reva. Maybe it was the right call, actually, just have one Inquisitor, or maybe have the other Inquisitors be more in the background and have them be, less apparent. In terms of Reva, I think her character is written in such a way where you're not supposed to like her, and I don't think hardly anyone really likes Reva. Across the board, most Star Wars fans seem to really dislike the character, and it's certainly not the fault of the actress. She actually did a really good performance, but at the same time, it's sort of it's tough because the way that character is written really makes it difficult for the audience to sort of sympathize with her. I think we kind of do at the end, at least I did, that she was trying to have sort of a redemption arc. I think they probably need to move away from that kind of motif for characters, where it's someone who's fallen to the dark side who has a redemption arc. Obviously, that's the story for Darth Vader, but does every new Inquisitor that's introduced also have to have that same story arc? I don't know. It seemed a little redundant, so I don't think that necessarily worked. I wouldn't mind seeing her in some other context. I just think having so much of the focus on Reva for this particular series, I think it took away from what it should have been. In terms of the plot, I think it was a little long-winded, although it was only 6 episodes. In terms of them having saved Princess Leia twice, I think that was probably unnecessary, and also having 2 duels between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Also, I think it just seemed like repeating the same thing, although the 2 duels are actually quite different. Clearly in the first duel, Obi-Wan Kenobi's outmatched. He's fallen out of practice with his lightsaber skills and his use of the Force, and clearly Darth Vader's at his peak. So It was pretty troubling seeing Obi-Wan Kenobi get beat up so badly. There's also the scene where he gets dragged through the fire, which kind of poetic in a way, because the final scene that we saw in Revenge of the Sith, where Obi-Wan Kenobi is looking on a burned up Darth Vader. I think Darth Vader felt that on an emotional level as a betrayal, and so his punishment was to drag Obi-Wan Kenobi through the fire. So I think that was well done, and I think my only gripe about it is that he let him get away so easily, and it seems like that part didn't really seem plausible, how Obi-Wan Kenobi was allowed to escape from that scene. Also, the whole plot with Reva going to the Lars homestead, I think that part, it just didn't really work, and I think for a lot of hardcore Star Wars fans, that sort of broke canon in terms of Luke Skywalker. I don't think he actually saw a lightsaber at some point, but it was very close, and I'm just sort of like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like from the way we meet the Lars and Luke in A New Hope that they had ever had such an encounter. Obviously they had run-ins with the Sand People, but the idea of a Inquisitor coming to the Lars homestead, it didn't ring true to what we know about their life there on Tatooine. I also think Reva really should have been killed by Vader. Him leaving her alive, I don't think that made a lot of sense to me either. And I think that was in the original concept for the series or the movie, because I know this was going to be a feature film initially. The writer did have Reva die at the end. And I think that would have been plausible, a much better way to sort of cap off that character. I think most of the other stuff that they had written for Reva was in the initial draft. Her being a former Jedi who had somehow survived the attack on the temple, Order 66. I believe all of that stuff is actually true to the original source material. But I don't think she was supposed to survive at the end. But I think there was a redemption arc for her character, but I don't recall. I'd have to go back through that material and see. It's been a while since I actually looked through those interviews with the original writer. There's some other stuff that I really liked about that. All the stuff with Owen Lars, the back and forth between him and Obi-Wan Kenobi was really well done. The scenes with him and young Luke Skywalker were also really cool. So, that actor really delivered on the performance and seemed plausible as a younger version of the character that we meet in the original film. There's also a really fantastic goodbye scene between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Princess Leia on Alderaan, where he talks about her real mother and father, and gives a little bit of encouragement to her, and it's just a really well-written scene, and all of that really made sense in the context of the original trilogy, so and the prequels too. So I think that one was extremely well done. There's also a scene where at the very end, Obi-Wan Kenobi encounters the Force ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn, and I think we were all hoping we were going to see that, and I'm very glad that they decided to include that as a scene. To me, it made sense, and it actually made sense in the context of the story, because Obi-Wan Kenobi had sort of lost touch with what it is to be a Jedi, lost touch with the Force, and to have Qui-Gon Jinn appear at that point, it actually made a whole lot of sense in terms of the story arc for Obi-Wan Kenobi. So I really enjoyed that. I think overall, I just think it should have been shorter and more concise in terms of the storytelling. It probably would have worked better as a feature film. The fact they expanded it out into a series, I think maybe hurt it a little bit. Basically, if they had focused more on just Vader and Obi-Wan, I think the show would have been a huge success. So much of the focus being shifted over to the Inquisitors, I think that it just complicated it to the point where you're sort of questioning, why is this show about these other characters and not about the central character? So, I think maybe, if they had focused more on that original draft of the script and maybe taken out a little bit of the Riva stuff, it might actually have been good. But who knows? It's really difficult to say. I know there's a fan edit out there somewhere, which I haven't watched, but apparently it edits down the series to something more shorter, more like a feature film. And there's also more of John Williams' music put into that particular version. I haven't seen it yet, but I hear it's pretty good. Just in terms of the overall execution of it, it just seems to be much more in keeping with the pace that we're used to for Star Wars. Star Wars films in general have a very fast pace. Even the animated Clone Wars series are generally, they're not slow moving for the most part. So I think they should maybe try and stay consistent with that for projects going forward, just because it really takes you out of it when you're telling a much longer story and there's a lot of exposition and long pauses, and it just doesn't feel as much like Star Wars. And maybe that's the lesson to take away from this. I would have loved it if there'd been more flashbacks also. We had that one, obviously, flashback between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, the lightsaber training session. And that was fantastic. I loved all of that. I think maybe a series where there was sort of intercutting between the past and the present, sort of like the way they did it with Book of Boba Fett. Although, that series had its own set of flaws, but actually intercutting between two time periods might have actually worked a little bit better for this series, because you could have seen how Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi were friends, colleagues, and seeing Anakin in that context and then juxtaposing that with what he's become. I think that might have been something that really would have worked for the entire series. Like something in that context, I would watch the hell out of that. I think that would actually be pretty interesting in terms of like if they decide to do a second season of this show, maybe do more flashbacks and have Obi-Wan Kenobi remembering the good person that was Anakin Skywalker, and then juxtaposing that with scenes with Vader. I think that would be a pretty intriguing way to do it. And obviously, if they did a season 2, I'd definitely want to see more of Qui-Gon Jinn, and more of him training Obi-Wan and getting more in tune with the Force, so that when we see him in the original film, he is fully on board with the performance given by Alec Guinness. I think that would be a really good approach. And again, I don't really know if they're going to do a second season of this show. I guess only time will tell. I know the reception was somewhat lukewarm from the fans in terms of the series, so I don't know if it's worthwhile for them to pursue it. Who knows? In terms of there may be a shakeup at Lucasfilm at some point too, because I know there's certainly a number of people who are unhappy with Kathleen Kennedy in terms of what she has been greenlighting in terms of projects, and also the lack of feature films. is a little troubling. I know there's talk about various film projects. There was supposed to be a Rogue Squadron movie that completely got canceled, and I'm not too sure why. But yeah, there may be some changes in the works, and hopefully changes for the good. I would love it if Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau were given more, put in charge more, because I think for the most part, those two guys really understand Star Wars, particularly Dave Filoni, who worked very closely with George Lucas on Clone Wars, and I think he understands the story of Star Wars, he understands the characters, and he really knows how to tell a story in such a way to make it consistent with what we as fans expect. So hopefully, he's given more responsibilities in terms of the direction of particular projects going forward. So we'll see what happens. Overall, I liked the series, but it definitely had its problems, and I do recommend that people watch it. Just keep in mind that it's definitely not perfect by any means, and definitely could use some edits, basically. Or, again, there is that fan edit out there, which I haven't seen, but I would be interested in watching that at some point. So hopefully I'll do that, and maybe I can give you my thoughts on that at some point. So in terms of what's coming up next on the podcast, I do plan on covering Andor and Tales of the Jedi. So I think tentatively I'm going to plan to do that. Hopefully, maybe even drop that next weekend, so you guys don't have to wait 2 weeks for the next episode of the podcast. Again, I had originally planned to cover all 3 of the series in this particular episode, but it just seemed like too much to try and cram into a single podcast. So I decided to stay focused and just cover Obi-Wan Kenobi. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this. And let me know in the comments what your thoughts are about the series. I assume you've watched it. If you made it this far into this particular episode, I assume that you're here because you've watched the series and wanted to hear my thoughts on it. So yeah, let me know in the comments what you think about it, and if you have other suggestions for things you'd like to have me cover here on the podcast, also leave those in the comments. I will be covering other topics, including we will do at least another episode about G.I. Joe. Hopefully that'll drop before the end of the year. I'd like to do that, maybe sometime in December. What I'm thinking about doing is maybe picking out a certain segment of my 40th anniversary collection and covering that. Like I have a lot of Marines from the 40th anniversary of G.I. Joe, so I could do a podcast just about those. But I'm sort of kicking around some interesting ideas, so hopefully I'll get something together, and I will let you know ahead of time what the topic is going to be. So once again, thank you for joining me for another episode of the Logic Blaster podcast, and thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Have a great day.